Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center webinar. We are very lucky today to have with us Peter Engelstad. My name is Emily Fusco, and I am the Deputy Director at NECASC, and I will be your host today. Let's see, Peter is a research associate and PhD candidate at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Colorado. His current research focuses on the development of new and novel methods for the production, evaluation, and interpretation of species distribution models. Peter works with models of invasive species to better our understanding of the spatial processes and patterns underlying invasions. He's also the primary developer of the invasive species habitat tool called Inhabit and a web decision support tool hosted by USGS. Today, Peter is going to talk to us about anticipating freshwater invasive species risk in the Northeast US. And with that, I am going to just turn it over here to Peter so Peter can share screen and get started with all this great info he's going to share.
Thanks, Emily. All right, how are we looking, Emily?
Looks good.
Looks good to me too. I'll just holler if it goes dark for any reason. Um, Appreciate everybody being here today and and cast giving us the opportunity to give a little closeout presentation on this project where we're uh, using spatial information to assess freshwater invasive species risk across the Northeast United States. I just wanted to, acknowledge a few of my collaborators with USGS. There are many others that I will highlight at the end of this presentation as well. So, like probably most folks on this call are aware, invasive species are an ongoing, expanding, and ever increasingly expensive problem, both in the US and globally. Just wanted to highlight here that, the context of, how big of a problem is this? Recent work has equated it with costs similar to natural hazards. So it's just a good way of contextualizing this problem. And aquatic invasive species are certainly a portion of that. And so when we're thinking about how do we address invasive species as a large global or national topic, we're often interested in detecting things before they become a problem. So prevention, detection, really like getting in on the early part of the invasion curve on the image at the bottom here and talking about where can we be effective, where can we control these costs and these impacts before they become a problem. And one way that we can try to do that is through invasion risk assessments. And so the one of the ways that we do that is by balancing these sort of aspects of invasion risk assessments, or sort of we can think about how they've been balanced in the past. And that's, looking at how is, what's the scope of these risk assessments? How many species are we including? What's the temporal geographic coverage? What sort of capacity or logistics do we have to produce either more or less complex models? Basically, all this is how much information can we produce, and is it enough to actually assess risk for species that haven't necessarily become a problem in every single place that we're interested in some sort of focal area. And really, what this means historically is that there are trade-offs between, the actual number of species that we can look at, or the resolution of the data. And, the approach of this project is trying to say, like, how complex of models and how much information can we use? Can we combine current and future information, and can we do that over a really large geographic area? And specific to the focal area of freshwater invaders, a lot of times um, that freshwater environment is reduced due to lack of data availability. So when we're approaching this, we're trying to see how much can we expand, how much can we get in that target center of the overlap of these different ways of balancing invasion risk assessments. And one of the complex modeling methods that's out there is species distribution models. And so I'm not going to go into a full academic lecture on what SDMs are, but essentially you can follow the flow chart on the right here. We have uh, observations that are sort of the lifeblood of how do we know where something is on the landscape. We have spatial environmental predictors. You can think of temperature or stream flow or water chemistry in the context of freshwater invaders, and those are uh, combined in a variety of model algorithms where there's functional relationships that can be applied across landscapes to generate these predictions of potential habitat that can support the establishment of an invasive species. And so how these are used in invasion risk assessments traditionally is really that spatial element, right? So how do we prioritize the landscape in terms of where species might be able to establish? How can we use that across uh, models of multiple species to generate watch lists in a focal area? So ranked risk lists of how much suitability one species might have over another, and then looking across species to say, okay, well, this pixel versus that pixel, we may have more potential species being able to occupy that habitat than this other one. But the interesting thing about SDMs is they, where each pixel is sort of assumed to have an equal probability of a species, reaching that location. So they're really unconstrained, and that can lead to over prediction, and maybe in the context of a large map, something that's maybe a little bit unrefined for particular management use cases. And so we're interested in this project in integrating something that allows us to constrain these predictions and tell us how might we weight these suitability predictions by the ability of species to move across the landscape. And to do that, we utilize secondary pathways of invasion. And so these are natural or human mediated modes of movement within, usually you can think of the context of a country. So, this is just sort of think common sense of just like when a species is in the US, how does it get around? That could be in waterways, that could be folks dumping out aquariums. There's lots of different avenues for species to move either naturally in a predictable way or stochastically through human mediated means. These, and some of you might be thinking, yeah, of course, like this pathways are a common component of existing risk assessment frameworks. But the difference here is that oftentimes they're not considered in a spatial context. They may be scored by a particular pathway that is being that has the potential to be facilitate invasion. But really, when you think about the nature of something like a stream network or where boat ramps are on the landscape, there's an inherent spatial component to that. And so we're interested in this project in developing some of those spatial representations, some maps of pathways to try to get at ways of augmenting those suitability predictions. So just a little overview of kind of the process, and I'll be going through kind of each of these steps. Really, describing here building a new invasion risk assessment framework. And I like to think of it as a quantitative or a spatial quantitative framework, because we're really trying to get at that spatial component of where on the landscape uh, is uh, is a species more or less risky, or sets of species more or less risky um, for AIS management in the Northeast. So the first thing that we do is we're interested in developing species and habitat specific models of current habitat. And so this is trying to get at, what is the current risk? What is the state of play given spatial environmental data from current time frame? What we can do with those models is then apply them to a variety of future environmental scenarios. And that allows us to generate additional representations of potential future risk. And then, like I was talking about, we're developing these maps of secondary pathways, and we can combine all three of those things into a single composite risk score that's rolled up at the Huck 12 level in this case. And I'll highlight that a couple times as I go on. And so that allows us to create a single digestible piece of information for managers to use while still having these components from steps 1 through 3. And so, the last point here, examples of management ready products, just kind of talking about like, what does this look like, both from a data standpoint and maybe from a data aggregation standpoint. So just to take a step back, I'm assuming everyone here knows that they're in the Northeast CAST webinar, but just as a reminder of kind of what we're talking about in terms of our study area, and then sort of, what's interesting about the Northeast in the context of this project. We're incorporating potential future risk as a component of this risk assessment. And really, there have been a number of studies, including the work here highlighted here by Annette Evans and other co-authors, that has shown that species are projected to be moving northwards and eastwards within the United States under future climate scenarios. Primarily, this work has been done with terrestrial species, at least across large numbers of species or multi-taxa studies. And so this work is hopefully filling in this gap of, including lots of freshwater species with the same kind of or a similar approach. So for this study, we solicited species from project stakeholders in previous webinars for this project. We really wanted to, try to emphasize a co-production environment where we're really leaning on managers and stakeholders in the Northeast to tell us, whether you're local, state, or federal, what are the species that you're concerned about now and going into the future. And so this is just a quick, snapshot of some of the species that are in our initial list. Out of this list, of course, there's some species that have lots of data and some species that really don't have enough to, we would describe them as maybe data deficient, not enough to produce a model or produce a good model. And so out of this, we were able to look at 103 species still across these 3 taxa groups of plants, invertebrates, macroinvertebrates, I should say, and fishes. So just going to kind of walk through the components of the risk score and then talk about, again, the sort of our management ready results or management focus results. We're creating models, species distribution models that are both species and habitat specific. And so what do I mean when I say that? So species specific, we're talking about selecting environmental predictors that are relative to the life history of those species, and then habitat predictors that are specific to water bodies, so talking lakes and wetlands, and then streams, because we know that lentic and lotic habitats have different requirements, and so we want to predict those separately and then combine that information into a final map. And so just kind of showing the high resolution of the map, obviously zoomed in here to Eastern Massachusetts, but this is just an example of across the entire Northeast region. This is the sort of level of detail that we start at for our predictions of suitability. And then what we do is we have up to 5 models in each of the habitat types. So we can combine up to 10 models into final maps. These are weighted by the model performance. And then we roll those up into Huck 12 aggregates. As you'll see later, the reason we're doing that is because that's our minimum mapping unit for the pathways. So got to get everything on kind of the same spatial scale so we can combine it in the end. So for once we have our models of current suitability made, we can use those to predict across the landscape to future environmental conditions. And, why are we not just looking at climate here? We have future land use scenarios. We have future stream flow scenarios. So we want to try to encapsulate, a more holistic description of like what things beyond just climate might be changing going into the future. And what we can do is we can look at, the variation across these different predictions, and we can take the mean and use that as a comparison or a component in our final risk score. And just a side note, again, kind of alluded to earlier, we have all these components in addition to our final scores, such that is sort of baked into the final score, but you can look at specifically comparing these current and future suitability maps and say, okay, where on the landscape is, suitability changing for, species A or species B or taxa group A or B. That's just an additional benefit of having this information, both as component and composite. So final part of the methods is looking at what are these spatial representations of secondary pathways of invasion? And so again, this is looking at both natural and human-mediated modes of movement. I will highlight 2 main things here. So B in the upper right, the downstream connectivity. This is our one pathways layer that is species specific. So we're looking at actual observations saying, if we have a species in a headwaters, where downstream might that species become a problem as well? And so obviously the more observations we have for a species within the Northeast, the more information we have about how it's already has the potential to move downstream. Everything below that, C through F, are what we'd call species agnostic pathways maps. So these are representations of information that just describe landscape condition. So you can see boat ramp density, the number of boat ramps within Huck 12, how much water's in Huck 12, sort of E is it, you can think of it as something of a representation of population density, or how easy is it for humans to traverse the landscape. And anthropogenic connectivity is how many waterways do we have crossing Huck boundaries. So all of these together get summed up into an overall composite score that is then normalized. And then, the one thing I want to make sure to note here is that the selection of these is also species specific. So consulting with taxa experts, just like you would do in any other risk assessment, you would say, okay, well, for species A, we're only considering, B, C, and D. We're not going to consider E and F or whatever the case may be. So, a species score may include all these components for pathways, or it may include just a portion of them. But we're trying to get at things that are relevant to the species and how it may potentially move or be restricted in its movement across the landscape. So just going to highlight a few ways of looking at what kind of highlighting what these results look like. So on the left here, have this four panel of the final composite score as a map. Um, and then, looking at these components. So I believe this is for European frogbit, just an example species of how different do these components look, and then what does it look like when they're combined. And you can start to see the influence of one particular score over another and how that changes over the landscape. And so this kind of result can be looked at the individual species level, as you see here on the left, but it can also be rolled up into kind of what I was alluding to earlier with like hotspot maps, looking at across either taxa groups or groups of specific you know species of concern for either like a working group or maybe a multi-state task force. Whatever species out of this list folks are interested in can be grouped and aggregated, and can look at what areas might be more vulnerable to more species in a spatial context. And the other way that the sort of non-spatial way that this information can be summarized is through regional and state watch lists, or really any focal area. So here, just showing an example. I know there's a lot of text on the screen. Apologies if you're kind of squinting in, but essentially, this is just one way of creating what I was describing before of the ranked risk lists, and that's just taking the average risk score, by some focal unit. And here we're looking at it either across the whole region or by state. You could do this by county, or prisms in New York, or other working group polygons, sort of whatever watersheds fall in your purview. And so just to highlight here, like we're including all the taxa in this study, but of course you could create the same list for just fish or just plants or just invertebrates. And we're highlighting here what we're calling alert species. Probably a lot of species on these lists that are of no surprise to folks working in these regions. But these alert species don't have a lot of information, at least publicly available. And so we're highlighting those as potential, early detection and rapid response species. So we have all these results currently available on Sciencebase for the 103 species, excuse me. And that includes maps of current and future habitat. Probably most importantly for folks on this call, these composite risk scores by the HUC 12, including the components, management summaries, and that's basically summaries of the current and future habitat by literally thousands of different management areas, everything from watersheds to counties to wildlife refuges to Army Corps boundaries. And then model performance metadata for those folks who are interested in what's going into these models in terms of the specific spatial environmental predictors that are influencing these predictions. That available information is available to, excuse me. So, what is the key takeaway here? We're trying to create a framework that is robust to not just this type of information in this set of species. We want to make it robust to other geographies, other taxa, and other ecosystems. Of course, that depends on the availability of data in your particular region. But what we hope is with this approach that we can thread that needle of having complex models that still predict across a wide geographic area. They can cover a lot of species, and really to get at that early detection piece to integrate both and explicitly integrate current and future habitat, and then roll that pathways piece in there to really constrain that information of suitability so that um, our our results are ready to be used, really as a complement and a way of contributing to the great work that's already going on for AIS management in the Northeast. This includes, helping inform things like eDNA surveys or long-term monitoring of, a variety of resources that folks may be interested in, um, you know, implementing prevention efforts to try to protect recreation, agriculture, human health. And just a note, the is just in terms of the plant data, we'll be streaming the maps for future and current suitability on Inhabit in the near future. That's something that I'm in charge of, and we're working really hard to get that up online for everybody to be able to quickly navigate and ingest that information. And this website for Inhabits below can certainly drop that in the chat as needed, or others can. But with that, um, I'd just like to thank my collaborators and co-authors. A lot of work has gone into this. Thanks to CASC for funding this project, and our project stakeholders for really making this feel like a nice co-production, especially in terms of generating something that is the species of concern for folks working in the region. And again, we have information out there on ScienceBase, both the predictors that we have aggregated or developed, fresh ones for this project, and also the initial results. We're looking forward to potentially iterating on this process in the future, but excited to share these results with folks. And with that, happy to take any questions, and I will maybe stop sharing for now, but I can always bring it back up if folks have specific questions about specific slides.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Peter. That was an excellent presentation. We do have some questions that have come in over our Q&A box here. And for everyone else, if you haven't added any questions to that Q&A box yet, please feel free to do so. So the first question here is, have any jurisdictions used this type of risk assessment to proactively regulate high-risk species? And if yes, how did they approach doing or approach choosing a time horizon? For example, is the species predicted to be high risk in 10, 20, or more years as a result of climate change projections?
Yeah, so this is new information. This approach hasn't been actively utilized in the field. Hopefully that will be happening in the future. But what I will say is that the the temporal context of the future risk in this study is kind of near term, through I believe through 2040, for I believe for most of the future scenarios. So it's really trying to get at what are the near term changes, not sort of end of century like you might see in some other longer term scenarios.
Great, thank you. All right, we've got another question here. So, did you notice any patterns among different states, or did you notice any variation between abutting states that surprised you?
I mean, you certainly have, you can see the influence of population density, certainly with the pathways layers. Um, we have fewer macro invertebrates overall in the list, and so there's a little bit more geographic variation in terms of what we see with them. Um, in terms of those watch lists, we do see like fish being a little bit more represented in at least in those top 10 lists compared to just our overall list. So, I mean, it's, you know, maybe that's neither here nor there. Like if something is has impacts, you know, people are going to want to know about it. But yeah, certainly, like, you know, you can think about there being different management goals in one state versus another in terms of, you know, maybe one state they don't consider a particular species, non-native species, a problem, but then the next state over they do, or even watershed to watershed. And so what's nice about these results is that, you know, we can think of, you know, early detection in the context of the entire region, but we can also think about it just in the context of whatever local management is happening, and that could be state to state, county to county, or even more, you know, more local jurisdictions than that.
Great, thank you. All right, our next question here is, are the risk scores evaluating establishment probability only, or do they incorporate impact potential?
So yeah, that's I think a question that's been brought up before. So this isn't incorporating, you know, anything about the specific local context. You know, this again, what we see this project and this information is doing is complementing and adding to the information that folks already have on the ground or species experts already have about particular impacts of invasive fish or of an invasive plant. So this is just looking at that spatial context of, you know, habitat and then your movement potential on the landscape.
Gotcha. All right, we've got another question here. So, did you see any differences in the risk scores among states based on any strengths or weaknesses of their aquatic invasive species prevention and outreach programs?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that's another place, you know, what is the efficacy of those programs? I mean, that's I think, you know, including that's just beyond the scope of looking at and producing this data. But yeah, I think that's a great direction to take this in the future, and to think about, you know, in an iterative process, right? Like we don't want to run this just one time. We want to like look at how can we improve this process, improve the, you know, risk score predictions that we're making, add pathways, you know, add species, you know, especially things that are like really on that bubble of having enough information. You know, maybe there's something that's only in Maryland and there's only, you know, 12 points, but, you know, next year, okay, it's blown up. Like we can, you know, include that in a future assessment. And we can, you know, think about integrating, you know, what are, you know, or suggesting ways that you can integrate this information with, you know, evaluation of management efficacy.
Great. So another question here now about kind of the factors that went into determining risk for these. So one question about if dam removal was considered as a factor, and if you could just talk a little bit more about, in general, how some of those were chosen and kind of what that process looked like and which things kind of panned out as being more important, whether that varied with taxonomic groups or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that kind of speaks to, you know, what are we selecting in terms of the pathways? At least dams seems, you know, kind of most relevant to that. You know, it's tricky, right? Because you're a lot of times you're creating proxies for these things to actually represent them spatially. And yeah, like, you know, one of the things that we want to try to include in the future is more of, you know, what are some scenarios of how water levels could change, you know, and that could be driven by things like anthropogenic influence of things like dam removal or dam construction. It could be, you know, natural hazards from storms and sort of floodwater movement. You know, those sort of things are not currently in there, but that's, you know, we have a vision to look into those things for future iterations of this. So yeah, definitely something we want to look at in the future, but yeah, specific dams specifically um, are are not like a a data point in those maps, but there are other things that sort of represent um, human built environment and how that may facilitate the movement of AIS across the Northeast.
Great. All right, so we have a species specific question. So do you know, is spiny water flea available in these lists? And if not yet, is that something that might be available later?
Oh, that's a good question. I will come clean here. I am not the eminent aquatic biologist on this team, so I am not entirely sure off the top of my head. But if my co-authors are in the chat and can possibly contribute, they can chime in. But certainly, on that science-based page, and you can look through the species list that'll be up on there, and certainly if there are species that aren't on there that are of interest to you in your particular management context, like yeah, please reach out and let us know that that's something that you'd be interested in seeing going forward, because again, this information is going to be up on both science based and then eventually on Inhabit. There's other places it might show up, like USGS NAS. So that the more relevant we can make it, the better.
Great. And yeah, any of Peter's co-authors that are on right now, if you do have an answer to that question or a different question and you want to raise your hand, you can do that and I can allow you to talk in the webinar as well. Uh, all right, looks like Wes Daniel is raising hand here. So Wes, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Got you, Wes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Yes, spiny water flea is one of the invertebrates that we selected and it's part of the model. So no worries, it's there, and you can definitely take a look at it.
Thanks, Wes.
My pleasure.
All right. We've got another question here. So, could you speak to brown trout and rainbow trout stocking that states continue to do and that impact on brook trout?
Um, Again, as not an eminent aquatic biologist, I maybe can't speak to the impact specifically, speak species to species, but yeah, definitely, I know that whenever I talk about this project, brown trout really catches some eyes. And again, this list is entirely driven by suggestions from local managers across the Northeast. And so, yes, like certainly brown trout is a managed species in some places, and then in other places it's not, or it's at least desired to not be present in all locations. And so that's the kind of nice thing about having these sort of predictions across a really large geographic area, is that one jurisdiction may be more interested in that species than another, and or more one state to another. And so that having that information allows different use cases, whether it's brown trout or spiny water flea or knotweed or whatever species that is sort of interest.
Great. And I think you did have a slide that kind of talked about all of those different materials that are available on ScienceBase. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about what each of those different component pieces are and what's actually available for people now?
Yeah. So all the maps, in terms of the raster maps that I was showing as the components, those are all available to download. So the current suitability, the future suitability, and then we have sort of more tabular information, right? Of like, here's the Huck 12s and here's the risk of each of the components within the Huck 12s. And so all that's available on ScienceBase. There's also, again, like the model metadata, like the information use to make decisions like what pathways were selected by each species, or what's the performance of the models for you know brown trout, spiny water flea, and down the line, including you're showing the full list of species that we're looking at, but we weren't able to model. So, if you're wondering sort of like, oh, why isn't this species showing up? Like maybe we did try to look at it, but there wasn't enough information, or we couldn't produce an accurate enough model. And then it's the last component is those management summaries. So looking at, within a county, within a watershed, within a prism group, like what is the actual amount of current and potential future habitat, just summarized quickly within those. So if you're just interested in a specific thing, like I'm a county weed manager in, Western New York, or like, Eastern Pennsylvania, and I just want to know that specific information, like that information is in there as well.
Awesome. All right, we've got kind of another question here related to how you all selected these species. Can you maybe go over that a little bit? And then a second part to that question about, whether there is any potential future direction in partnering with specific entities within the Northeast and being able to tailor these results more specifically than they already are.
Yeah. So for the first question, we solicited species to a stakeholder group that we sort of aggregated through kind of an organic means. I don't know the specific numbers, but I'm gonna just throw out at least 100 different participants in these webinars, and just had a public entry point where folks could suggest species, or like upvote species that were suggested by others to help us prioritize uh, what we are actually going to model. And the the goal of this was to try to get at species that are already invasive species that are already established in the U.S. somewhere. I think we kind of ballooned outside of that scope a little bit, but I think that's okay, because again, like they're the depending on like sort of the geographic scope of your jurisdiction, you may be interested in a different set of species than someone with a different geographic context. And sorry, what was the second question again?
Oh, so the second part of that question was whether there were any partnerships happening that might allow you all to tailor these kind of more specifically for any given area.
I think if folks are interested in that, we don't have like any active initiatives that I'm aware of, but certainly if folks are interested in, having a little bit of guidance, like interpreting results, or, thinking about ways of integrating them with the information that they may already have on hand in their jurisdiction, we definitely welcome them to reach out to us, and, we can do our best to provide that guidance, and depending on sort of the level of interest, like we can think about developing something, whether that's down the road with additional species, or some sort of mini webinar like this, that's like, okay, we've got this kind of subgroup of folks that we can maybe dive into the specific data for that jurisdiction or that management context. But yeah, I would just encourage folks to reach out to us if they're interested in doing something like that.
Great. So this next question is about aquatic invasive species prevention. So specifically thinking about Minnesota and how a lot of the spread of invasive species there has been significantly curbed. Uh, so the question is whether, I guess specifically about, so surveys of boaters and anglers showing 95% reported preventative behaviors and really high compliance as well on watercraft inspections. And so whether there's the possibility that, data from boater surveys or watercraft inspection data could be incorporated at all to kind of think about how that affects risk calculation in different areas.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know who specifically asked the question, but I've definitely seen. I know at NASMA last year there was good presentations that I saw about um, some of that voter survey stuff that's happened in Minnesota. And I think it's a fantastic data set that I'm not aware of other states that have replicated that. Perhaps they have, but certainly it provides a model for how can we have that type of information to serve as maybe an extra weight for something like our boat ramp density component of the pathways layer,
Mm.
to say like, okay, well, this might this watershed might have lots of boat ramps, but everybody here is doing a great job and we're less interested. I think it's always a give and take, because sometimes 95% compliance might not be enough, to depending on how much consistent propagular pressure you're getting from maybe a species that's like harder to detect, or is people don't really realize is a problem yet. So it's certainly a component of how we should go about things in the future, just knowing behavior and integrating behavior into in some way, shape, or form into these spatial layers. But yeah, Minnesota's got a great product there, and I know that they're doing really interesting stuff with looking at risk within Minnesota using that information.
Right. Yeah. And so bringing that back to kind of this idea of partnerships and thinking about areas more specifically, is that kind of potentially an area that you all could explore more? So if you had that kind of data available about more specifics with what's going on with behavior in different watersheds, if that's a good potential direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's the rub with a project like this, is again, it's still there. We're doing our best, but there still are trade-offs, just like I highlighted up top. And one of those is that we often have patchy information in freshwater systems. You can think of something like water chemistry. Like we don't have products that are like continuously available across wall to wall areas in the U.S. And so we have to do the best we can to create things that are if we're creating a product that's continuous across a large geographic region, certainly in a sort of post hoc way, we can add in geographically specific information or partner with folks that have that information. And that's a lot of times you may not know that information exists, especially as you kind of go down into smaller and smaller jurisdictions. Folks at the county level maybe aren't sharing all the way up with federal managers, and that's just by nature of they're just trying to get their job done and they don't have capacity to share that information. But like, yeah, if you're in a you're a county manager in Vermont and you've got voter survey data, but like that's not something that sing from the rooftops, it's just something that you have, then yeah, like we can definitely like integrate that in a post hoc way with the information that's being produced, or sort of advise folks on how they might do that. And essentially that's going to allow you to sort of weight the water bodies and streams that are in your jurisdiction, in addition to the risks or that you're producing.
Awesome. Thanks so much. All right, before we wrap it up here for today, are there any other final thoughts that you have or want to share with the group, or any direction on website? If you have any links you want to share, we could do that now too.
I think the sort of the thing that when I'm working on projects like this, I'm always interested in, when you put it out there in the world, right? And you want to know who's actually using it. So like we always try to encourage folks, like if you are using this, whether you find it useful or not, like please reach out to us. Like we're very interested in getting feedback, on this. There can certainly be variation where the risk score is totally reasonable in Virginia, but up in Maine, you might have managers who are like, I don't know if this is like exactly what I would expect. And so, that's just again a trade-off you make with modeling across large geographic areas. But I think yeah, Emily and I talked about putting some links in to newsletters that are going to be going out in the near future. I think that that's useful. I can definitely throw a quick link in the chat to Inhabit. If folks are interested in looking at that website. Can certainly also try to go quickly grab like the Sciencebase URLs. That's I'll just throw those in there really fast. Da, da, da. Okay, cool. Just did that. So hopefully those resources are useful for folks. And again, yeah, any questions, comments, concerns, you know, clarifications, and opportunities to engage with folks in more specific jurisdictions. That's always opportunity for us to like actually see how this is working, and we look forward to anyone who's interested in doing that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yes, everyone, please reach out to Peter as you're using this product and let him know how it's going. Feedback is always welcome. Thank you, Peter, for your presentation today, and thank you all for joining. Uh, we will post a recording of this on the NECASC website in the next couple of weeks or so, so keep an eye out for it there if you want to revisit any of what we talked about today. All right, thank you again, Peter, and everyone have a nice afternoon.
Thanks for having me.